It always starts small. You say no when you used to say yes. You stop showing up where you don't belong. You begin listening to that quiet voice inside, the one you've ignored for years. And suddenly, people get uncomfortable. They say, "You've changed." They act like you've betrayed them. They pull back. They question your loyalty. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you stopped doing what served them. And that terrifies them. Because when you no longer need validation, you become unpredictable, uncontrolled, unapologetic. You start thinking for yourself. You stop playing the role, and they don't know what to do with that. You see, the world doesn't want you to be free. It wants you to fit, to follow, to obey. But Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." He wasn't wrong. The moment you begin to think independently, you become a threat. Not because you're violent, not because you're loud, but because you can't be manipulated anymore. That scares people. They fear what they can't control, and nothing is harder to control than a mind that knows itself. You start asking dangerous questions. Why am I doing this? What do I actually want? Is this belief even mine? And every time you ask, another illusion cracks. You see the fear in their eyes, not because you're dark, but because you've stepped out of the shadows. You're no longer mirroring their insecurities. You've stopped playing along, and that breaks the pattern. People don't like patterns breaking. They want you the same. They want you predictable. But you're waking up. And awakening isn't peaceful, it's violent, it's chaotic. It shakes your foundations and tears down everything false. You lose friends, you lose comfort, you lose the version of yourself that made others feel safe. But in that loss, you gain clarity. You realize that being liked was a prison, that approval was just a leash, that silence was complicity, and you refuse to go back. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And you're finding your why. You're no longer driven by guilt, no longer apologizing for your truth, no longer shrinking to make others feel tall. You've started walking a new path, one paved with solitude, self-respect, and fire. And though it feels lonely, it's real, it's honest, and it's yours. Because building a strong mind, one that terrifies people, doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a whisper, the whisper that says, "This is not who I am." And the moment you listen to that voice, everything begins to change. At first, it feels like loss. You stop being available. You stop over-explaining. You stop making yourself small just to fit into rooms that never saw your worth. And what happens? People leave. Plans fade. The rhythm you once danced to stops. The silence is loud. The space is uncomfortable. And your old self starts to whisper, "Go back. Be nice. Be needed." But you don't, because this time, you recognize the trap. You remember how exhausting it was to be everywhere for everyone and nowhere for yourself. This isn't rejection, it's refinement. You're not losing people, you're losing the illusion that you ever needed them. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." And becoming who you are requires unbecoming who they wanted you to be. That's the part no one warns you about. They tell you to be strong, to speak your truth, to set boundaries, but they don't mention how much it hurts to be misunderstood, how much it stings when the people you loved most turn cold because you finally chose yourself. You start wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I too harsh? Have I gone too far? But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. You're no longer reacting. You're responding, not from guilt, but from power. Because real strength is silent. It doesn't demand, it doesn't chase, it doesn't explain. It just is. And in that stillness, you begin to rebuild. Not the version of you that was soft for survival, but the version that's solid for self-respect. You begin to speak less and observe more. You start choosing solitude not as punishment, but as protection. Because not everyone deserves access to a mind you've fought this hard to sharpen. Not everyone gets to drink from a well you've dug with your own blood. And you finally understand. You're not hard to love. You just refuse to be used. You're not distant. You're discerning. You're not cold. You're calibrated. They say you've changed, and you have. You've gone from available to aligned, from pleasing to powerful, from performing to present. This is the stage where people start projecting. They say you're selfish, arrogant, rude. But that's because you've stopped bleeding to keep them warm. You've stopped handing out parts of yourself just to be tolerated. And now, they don't know what to do with someone who no longer needs saving. Because power like this, calm, quiet, untouchable, terrifies people. Not because you're cruel, but because you're free. And freedom, it's not loud, it doesn't beg, it doesn't try to convince, it simply walks away from anything that doesn't nourish the soul. So if you're here, in this lonely, sacred stretch of the path, keep going. It's not isolation, it's preparation. You're not being abandoned, you're being refined. Because the next version of you, the one you're building in silence, they won't recognize it, and that's exactly the point. They won't understand. Not at first, because when you finally choose yourself, you stop making sense to those who only knew the version of you that needed them. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you've lost your spark. They'll call you cold, distant, arrogant. But really? You've just stopped leaking energy into conversations that go nowhere, into people who drain you, into roles you never chose. This isn't bitterness. It's boundaries. It's not revenge. It's realignment. Because you're not trying to prove anything anymore. Not trying to earn space. Not trying to be chosen. You've chosen yourself. And that changes everything. You become quieter, not out of weakness, but because your peace is finally louder than your need to explain. You don't respond to chaos. You don't chase closure. You don't explain your silence. You've learned that some things don't deserve your energy, no matter how loudly they demand it. Nietzsche once wrote, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. And now, you're dancing to a rhythm only your soul can hear. Yes, it's lonely. You'll feel misunderstood. You'll grieve the comfort of your old self. You'll crave the familiar noise of approval, even when it used to choke you. But this loneliness, it's not empty, it's fertile, it's alive. It's the soil where your new self begins to grow. Because here's the truth. When you build your life around external validation, you build it on sand. It crumbles the moment you stop performing. But when you build it from within, from stillness, from truth, from integrity, you become unshakable. You're no longer afraid of losing people. Because you've found something rarer, yourself. You no longer bend for acceptance. You no longer shrink for comfort. You no longer bleed for love. You realize that peace is not found in fixing others, but in facing yourself. And when you finally look inward, you see the wounds, the patterns, the programming. Not to shame them, but to break them, to rewrite the story, to step out of the victimhood they handed you and into the authorship you were born for. And yes, it costs you. It costs you being liked. It costs you fitting in. It costs you the illusion of belonging. But what you gain is real power. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't prove, doesn't please. It just is. Solid, silent, steady. You become a mystery, not because you're hiding, but because you're whole. And wholeness terrifies people who are used to fragments. So let them talk, let them question, let them misunderstand. Their confusion is not your responsibility. Your only responsibility is to remain aligned to the truth you fought so hard to find, because real freedom isn't walking away from others. It's walking back to yourself. And every step you take in that direction builds a mind so strong, it no longer seeks to be understood. It simply exists. You don't argue anymore, not because you've lost your voice, but because you've found your peace. You realize that not every battle is yours to fight, not every misunderstanding needs correcting, not every opinion deserves a response. You've built a mind that isn't desperate to be heard, but disciplined enough to stay silent when it counts. That's what they don't expect. They expect the old version of you, the one who over-explains, who breaks their own boundaries to avoid conflict, who gives 1,000 chances just to keep the peace. But that version, gone. You've stopped performing empathy for people who never showed it to you. You've stopped sacrificing yourself on the altar of being nice. Because nice got you ignored. Nice got you used. Nice got you nowhere. So you choose clarity, even if it costs you connection. Because what's the point of connection if you have to disappear to maintain it? Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And now, your why is rooted in truth, not approval, not validation, not guilt. You're no longer bending for love that only existed when you were convenient. You're no longer shrinking to make others feel tall. You're no longer betraying yourself just to be chosen. Because here's the raw truth. If being real means being alone, then alone it is. Not lonely. Just full of yourself for the first time. Full of awareness. Full of strength. Full of intention. You don't move just because someone pulls. You don't speak just because silence feels awkward. You don't explain just because they're confused. Because your peace is no longer negotiable. And your silence? It's a filter. It reveals who's willing to meet you without performance, without drama, without expectation. And what you start to see is that most people aren't ready for depth. They crave access, but not intimacy. They want your light, but not your darkness. They love the mask, but fear the mind behind it. But you've stopped hiding. You've made peace with your darkness. You've embraced your complexity. You've accepted that you won't be for everyone. And that's a good thing, because when you're for everyone, you're for no one. Least of all, yourself. And so, you become deliberate. You say no without guilt. You stay silent without shame. You walk away without hesitation, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Because your energy is sacred now. Your time is sacred. Your mind is sacred. And you won't waste it on people who only show up to take. They'll call you intimidating, too much, too intense. But what they really mean is, you can't be controlled anymore. And that's exactly the point. This is power, not loud, not forceful, not theatrical, still, unapologetic, certain. And in this stillness, you realize the strongest mind is not the one that dominates, it's the one that doesn't need to. You stop searching for validation, not because it no longer feels good, but because you've realized how quickly it fades. Compliments are cheap, attention is fragile, admiration is fleeting. And you've outgrown the need to be seen by eyes that don't understand what they're looking at. You've become something else, something deeper, not loud, not showy, but undeniable. And that unsettles people. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't flinch when ignored, who doesn't chase when discarded, who doesn't perform when overlooked. They throw silence at you, expecting you to crumble, but you've made peace with silence. You've made it your sanctuary, because now your mind isn't a billboard, it's a mirror. And mirrors terrify people who don't want to see themselves. When you become deeply rooted in your truth, you reflect things in others they're not ready to face. Their insecurity, their jealousy, their control, their weakness. And so they'll say you're intimidating, not because you are, but because you won't bend, because you won't beg, because you won't shrink to make them feel tall. Nietzsche once wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." And you're finally breaking from the tribe, not out of rebellion, but out of revelation. You see the game now, the subtle manipulations, the guilt trips, the emotional baiting, and you don't bite, you don't play, you don't explain your power to people who would rather see you powerless. Because the truth is, you don't owe anyone your softness just because they fear your strength. Let them misunderstand. Let them twist your silence into arrogance, your solitude into selfishness, your boundaries into cruelty. That's not your burden. Your burden is your own becoming, your own clarity, your own alignment. You've stopped asking, will they like me? Now you ask, does this honor me? You no longer say yes to conversations that drain you, to people who manipulate you, to places that shrink you. You say yes to yourself. And the moment you do, you shift from being reactive to being rooted in truth, in awareness, in sovereignty. And that rootedness, that unshakable presence, that's what truly terrifies people. Not because you hurt them, but because they can't move you anymore. You've become still, not numb, not distant, still. Still enough to see through the noise, still enough to feel your own voice, still enough to choose yourself without flinching. And in that stillness, you find something they never taught you to seek: self-respect. Not the kind built on praise, but the kind built on boundaries. The kind that whispers, I am not here to be consumed. I am not here to be tamed. I am not here to be understood. I am here to be. And if they can't handle that, then maybe they were never meant to meet you. Only the version of you who needed to be needed. That version is gone. What remains is rare. And now, I ask you, would you rather be liked by everyone or respected by yourself? You no longer need to raise your voice. Your presence speaks. Your boundaries speak. Your peace is a message, because now you understand power isn't loud. It doesn't beg. It doesn't prove. It simply is. And when your power is rooted in silence, you stop trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop arguing with ignorance, defending your choices to the insecure, explaining your boundaries to those who benefit from your lack of them. Because now you see, real strength isn't in what you fight, but in what you walk away from. You walk away from fake apologies, from performative relationships, from the roles you were cast in just to keep others comfortable. You let go, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And with that clarity, you no longer chase love, you become it. You no longer seek validation, you validate yourself. You no longer fear being alone, because solitude has become your source of strength. In a world obsessed with noise, you've mastered stillness. While they rush to speak, you pause to listen. While they react, you reflect. While they grasp for control, you breathe and release. Nietzsche once said, "You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes?" And you've burned, you've watched your illusions crumble, you've buried your masks, you've let go of identities that were never truly yours. And from those ashes, you've rebuilt, quietly, intentionally, powerfully. You become someone who doesn't just survive storms, you become the calm within them. Someone who doesn't need the room to approve. You are your own permission. Someone who doesn't fear endings, because you know every ending is the birthplace of a new self. This is not arrogance. This is arrival. The moment where you no longer chase peace, you embody it. Where you no longer search for strength, you live it. Where you no longer ask, will they stay? And instead ask, will I still respect myself if I let them? Because in the end, that's the real power. Not who loves you, not who chooses you, not who sees your worth, but whether you do. So now, after everything you've been through, after all the silence, all the shedding, all the rebuilding, I ask you this: are you willing to become so mentally strong that your very existence becomes someone else's mirror, even if it means being feared before you're understood?